Okay, thanks, Dan. As you can see, we are Team Wink, and we are going to be leading off this presentation with the tantalizing title of Informal Learning in the Corporate World. And on the team here, we have Dan and Chuck and myself, and we all work for Anthem. And joining us is Megan and Patrick. I'm not sure if they were able to be on the call today, but they've been helping us with this project. And the problem that we are addressing is informal learning in the corporate environment. And the American Society for Training and Development recently released a study, 2013, that said 27% of respondents reported that informal learning represented a lot of the actual learning that took place. But this same study also acknowledged that it's difficult to pinpoint and record the exact number of hours an employee participates in informal learning because there's not a way to track it. And so this led a lot of credibility to our problem statement, and we were thinking about informal learning along the lines of internet activity, coaching, social networking that takes place in the corporate environment, things that you do on the job, peer-to-peer training or working with others. And so we wanted to try to figure out a way to build a working prototype or a concept, a way to start tracking this learning, and so that we can have it for the learner and also for managers in the corporate environment, that they could see the activity that was taking place. So as it exists today, there's not a lot of formal tools to track informal learning. You know, we have log files, but those are cumbersome and they're hard to parse through and to surface any meaningful data without a lot of work. There's self-reporting tools which you know, can be limited, that does provide some valuable information because the learner is participating in reporting some information, but also then because it requires the learner to participate, it might not be as detailed. And then there's performance support tools that can show activity, but again, like log file, it's not specifically geared towards surfacing this sort of information that tracks this informal learning. So our team tried to come up with something that would allow us to track informal learning in this corporate environment. And so with that, Dan's going to go ahead and talk about our proposed solution and then give us a demo of what we come up with.
Okay. Talk about, you know, breaking up the flow. Yeah, David covered, he talked about our problem statement. So I'm going to go into our proposed solution. So what we decided to look at is SharePoint, and specifically at this point, SharePoint 2013, and there was a couple of reasons behind that. SharePoint has, as probably all of us are aware, a very wide adoption. According to a recent article on TechNet, well, not so recent, about 4 years ago, 78% of the Fortune 500 companies are using SharePoint. And so you think about these companies and the teams within the companies potentially hosting into SharePoint what we would consider informal learning, whether it's on the job or sharing knowledge. You know, it's a source that's used quite widely, as well as it actually acted as, there's a standard framework underneath SharePoint, mainly built-in authentication, and which is really important, that if we want to be able to capture users' information, we need to know two key elements, their email and their name, as part of our statement to an LRS. So that's why we decided to really target SharePoint for our initial proof of concept. So within SharePoint, we decided to take a look at using web parts because we wanted to make sure that whatever we came up with could be potentially done by somebody that's not too technical. They need to be a little bit technical. But within our initial proof of concept, we wanted to support a few things. One was, you know, there's that bookmarklet out there that is really, you know, cool. But I'll be honest, probably the majority of the users within my company, that would be just way beyond their capability to even set it up the first time. But we wanted something similar where somebody could do self-reporting. You know, for a couple of reasons. One, it makes the learner more empowered, but there's also that social element where if there's this, let's call it a widget on a SharePoint page that says, hey, you can report that you learned something from here and give it a rating, it helps validate that content. So there's that social element with the self-reporting. But we also wanted to take into consideration automatic tracking. So if on a SharePoint page somebody embeds a little podcast or other type of content type such as a discussion, having an option to be able to have the SharePoint auto-magically capture those events and, you know, save them as part of that learner's informal learning history. And the third part is, it's great if you can track it all, but for the learner, there's not much motivation for them unless they can actually see their history. So we wanted to also create an element where they can actually see their recent activity, so it helps validate that, here I've been learning this information. So for this demo, what we initially focused on was around the forum/discussion board and a video. So now we get into the little show and tell. Okay, this is a lovely SharePoint page that Patrick and Megan actually really set this up, and then I got to go in there and start playing with it to do some coding. So we decided to create this custom web part, and I'll just talk to it as it still loads. What you should end up seeing once this page fully loads, you're going to end up seeing on the right side a web part where we package together the idea of self-reporting, but also a recent activity history. There we go. Okay, so the web part is loading right now. So the first thing it does is it has to query SharePoint to figure out who the user is and get their information. Okay. Once that happens, it starts to load. Then once it has that user information from SharePoint, it's able to then send a request off to the LRS to get their recent history in order to create a little data table that we'll see here in a moment. But it adds, I'm hoping that you've seen at this point, the little new learning experience. So we tried really hard to make sure that the widget itself, or the web part, would blend well into any SharePoint environment. So what that meant was really trying to understand the class names that are used by SharePoint. So this way, our web part would look like it's part of the SharePoint environment, and that would have more of a seamless look. Plus, as you apply different themes, we want to make sure that the theme would get applied to the web part as well, so it doesn't look disjointed.
Right.
And you'll see that there's a little message here saying, okay, that has the user information, and now it's loading the LRS history. And there we go, we have it. Phew. So here we have our nice little history for the last 30 days, what action was taken, what the activity was. Our labels we came up, we were trying to come up with labels that we were hoping that users within our environment would find more, that they would understand it a little bit better. Doesn't mean that this would fit every environment, but so we said action, here's your activity. If it was something that could be rated, here's the rating, when did they do it. Then within this environment, within this web part, I'm sorry, go ahead and make Chuck a presenter and let him demo this so you can actually see the interactivity instead of waiting for my computer to move about as fast as molasses does.
So in this, like Dan was saying, in our little web part over here, we have the last 30 days of history, where it shows the action, the activity, or the pace they took the activity on. A rating when it's for certain widgets and the date they did it. This little web part here, you can do sorting. You can click to view more additional information by clicking the little ellipse, I think is what we called it. So this will give you kind of more in-depth, or the user more in-depth information on their activity. Also here on the new learning experience, they have the ability to kind of track a new experience. So just clicking it will open a little box, give them the option. So this is kind of where we integrated the bookmarklet directly into the SharePoint page. They can click on their verb or action they did. Depending on the verb, we show and hide the rating, because some verbs just didn't lend themselves to a rating, just didn't feel right. So for something experienced, that leans more towards a good rating. I experienced something. Was it a good experience, a bad experience? I had a great experience, so I'm going to give it a 5. I click save. It sends the information to the LRS, and then once it's been processed, the table down here will be uploaded, and here it is. There's my new tracking information. So then what we did was, that's kind of the more formal, or what I like to call the formal learning. The person does the tracking themselves. We also have some nice little informal stuff to say. There's a little podcast or e-cast, like we like to call it, on the page. They can sit here and say they want to watch it. They click the play button, and this will then launch the video. I'm not going to watch the whole thing, but then up here you'll see it automatically captured, informally, that they launched the video on the date, And so it tracks that informal learning that, kind of where we wanted to steer toward, not only the formal but informal type stuff. We also did it over here where, we have this discussion board. Say I click into it, I'm going to review this discussion. Once it opens, there it comes. I have now read the discussion. If I go back to the home page, drum roll, it's going to be displayed in my, learning history. So that's kind of our first steps or our first, kind of successes into the informal. You'll see here that, it now has that I viewed the XAPI. Nope, I didn't mean to click on it. I got to look happy. So that's kind of the the formal stuff of being able to track it. The user track what they're doing, as well as our first kind of dives into the informal aspect, which is less user heavy. It's more the system sits there and tracks, and it'll be able to do the stuff behind the scenes where less user interaction.
Nice.
All right, did I miss anything?
So how difficult for you, let me ask you a question. I'm just going to jump to the head of the line because I can. How difficult was it for you guys to integrate this into SharePoint?
Well, that is one of the reasons why we targeted SharePoint 2013 is because with 2013, really this web part is using just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. With SharePoint 2013, they've actually really created a really robust JavaScript API to expose a lot of the underlying functionality. So it came down to using HTML to basically create the presentation piece. And then we used minimal CSS, just enough to give the structure that we needed. But we then just learned the classes used by SharePoint, and then the rest of it's just JavaScript. So once to add it, we actually just add it to SharePoint. If you're familiar with SharePoint, they have what's called a web part, actually a content editor web part.
Yep.
And once you add that to your page, the very first option is being able to point it to a text or HTML file. So we point it to the HTML file that we created in a folder that's called web part. And that HTML file loads all the JavaScript and starts to do the execution once everything's been loaded.
And Dan, while you're saying that, I am clicking along as well. Let's see if I have enough permission to actually see it. So here's our informal web part. Like Dan was saying, we just have it pointed to, where is, I don't have access to that little piece. So, ooh, that's disappointing.
So both of the web parts, we did both as a web part. So this way, on the informal one where we want to automatic tracking, even though the HTML portion shows absolutely nothing, by doing it that way, we're able to include all the JavaScript files that we need, and it pulls it all in automatically.
Right. Guys, there's hope for SharePoint yet. This is really cool. Actually, while I've got you at pause, does anyone have any questions for Chuck and Dan? No hands up.
And then I'm not able to show the last couple of slides because obviously my computer's like going AWOL. But the next couple of slides was basically just about talking about the where we're trying to go from here is we're still investigating other types of interactions that we may want to capture automatically, and also looking to potentially take the core logic of what we did, not so much the SharePoint authentication, but the other parts that's able to package things kind of really easily and turn it into some sort of type, jQuery type plugin, so that we could potentially use it in some other type of system where the person has to be more technical, obviously. They would have to know enough to figure out how to get the user information. But once that's been taken care of, being able to have it register itself so it can automatically track certain activities. So that's really where we want to try to start to evolve this. But right now, we're focusing a little bit more on SharePoint. And really SharePoint 2013 is what we're really targeting at this point. But that's where we want to start leveraging it, and I expect by the time we get to the boot camp, we'll have even more to be able to demonstrate and show, as well as even how it's done.
Nice. You guys should. I'm actually. She would have to kind of have the final say on this, but you guys should check in with the social collaboration community of practice. I know Aditi Gandhi is one of the people who's leading that group. That might be something to present to that particular community of practice, what you guys are working on.
Okay, great. And then also, I wanted to check at some point, check in with you to find out so we can get this workout onto the GitHub that you guys have set up for.
Oh yeah, excellent.
Season.
Yeah.
So that is part of our plan. So all the work that we've done on this is we've tried to make sure it's as much as possible, could be potentially used across any organization. So it's not. We're trying careful to make sure it was not customized to any particular one organization, so that it could be potentially reused by companies elsewhere.
Nice. Well, all right, guys. Thank you. I appreciate it.